G'day podcasters, welcome back to Season 4 of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. We'd like to thank Tactical Recovery for sponsoring this show. Head on over to tacticalrecovery.com.au and use the code TRUEBLUE for one hell of a discount. Tactical Recovery, magnesium-based muscle care, salty products for sore fuckers.
Oh,
and the guy's 72.
he's not a young.
Should be at home with his slippers on, watching in front of the fire, watching the TV.
Yeah, not sailing around the world doing that,
Yeah.
And there's a few like Bass Strait, that job, and then there's another job where you. So part of your air observing was marijuana crops and. Yeah, there's a job that you talk about that it got my straight away. I went, oh, Cam's in. This is going into some rugged country here, and a certain farm that you were.
Oh yeah. That was, you talk about. We used to send a single engine helicopter up to country areas every summer, the height of the growing season, and try and find these crops where people are planting them in the middle of nowhere. And some of them are huge. You think about that now, you think they don't even bother. But the main drug of choice back in early 90s and mid-90s was marijuana. So every year we'd go and find it. And the local we'd get together with the local coppers and we'd do 4 or 5 days in the area, and they'd say the parts of bush that they think the locals are growing their crops in. And there's a bit of a competition. We always wanted to find the bigger one or be the first to find it. And some guys are better than others. And we were floating around near Rainbow, which is near Nil, in the little desert, just south of the little desert. And we come across this property. There was a list of properties we had to look at. And I think it was one of the last ones before we got a fuel. We had a fuel truck follow us around and a police backup crew. There was myself and one pilot, and we talked about young policemen in cars, 22 and 20.
Yeah.
I remember sitting in that helicopter during drug season, this $1 million helicopter, in charge of it, flying with a pilot, and we're both the same age, 24.
Jeez.
So we'd got to this property. You see it on the horizon. It's covered in wheat fields. This yellow, the dead wheat, yellow, and had a short driveway to the house. Long garage with equipment in it, and the typical farmhouse with trees around it. But it had this treed area that was fenced off, and it would have been 3 or 4 house block sizes. And this, like I can identify a marijuana crop from the air, but these were big green pine trees we looked at, and we thought from a distance, we're about a K away, and we thought, geez, why are people growing these lines of pine trees in this bloody place up ahead? And as we got closer, we thought, pine trees, it's marijuana crop. So he'd had this bush area at the back of his house cleaned out in the middle of it and was growing these plants that were 13, 14 foot tall. They were huge.
Far out.
And then they had stumps on them that you couldn't get your hand around. Then as we flew around, there's a row, like a fence of all this dried stuff. And there was just as many plants dried. Ended up being about 3,500 plants. I remember seeing a white 4-drive, like a Range Rover type, in one of the sheds. We called for our backup. The backup was miles off. The fuel truck was miles off, and our fuel gauge is just, you can imagine it just sitting on almost zero. Now, legally, you can't land. You've got to land with a certain amount of reserve fuel. So we tossed up, either we fly to the fuel truck, either we sit here, run out of juice, and get absolutely shit canned by Civil Aviation Safety Authority for flying until we're empty, or we land at the place, or we go and get fuel. And we thought, if we land at the place, we can at least see if someone's there and lock them up. Problem is, I'm the one that's armed, the pilot's not. So we land, shut down the helicopter right in the front yard. First we went really low around it, actually. We got so close we were blowing the gutters off the house because we wanted to say if anyone's in there, they're going to come out.
Yep.
So we did a really low orbit, 4 or 5 minutes off the ground around the house. The windows would have been shaking. If anyone was in there, they would have shut their pants and come out, and they didn't. So then we landed, and the pilot went around the back, runs to the pilot to go out the back. Didn't have a firearm, but he was there to wait to see if anyone ran out, and I went through the front door. So I got my firearm out and tried to sneak through the front door, and of course old country homes have crickety floors, so I made that much noise. It wasn't funny, but I remember going in the kitchen, checking the rooms, then going to the kitchen, and the dishes had food in them that was still moist, and I thought someone's been here really recently, or they're here. So we checked the house and there was nothing there, so I went back out, said to the pilot, let's go into the shed, and the car was gone. So while we were landing, he'd gone out the back door, got in the car and taken off. So we had about 20 minutes of fuel left. We jumped in the helicopter and covered as much area, got as high as we could, and we saw every road for 10 k's in every direction, went up and down and orbits everywhere, even in the little desert, and couldn't find his car at all, even vanished. And I thought, we just let the grower, the biggest crop in Victoria ever found, walk out the front door and escape, and it was just demoralising. And you could imagine the amount of shit we copped back at the office. Was horrendous. And it turns out what he did is drove to the nearest farm, and it was his mates, and put his car in and waited till we all went.
Did they ever catch him?
They caught him, I think about 12 months later. He was in Italy and had about, I'm not sure, it was 75,000 or 175,000 in his bank account, which was his fee to mind the crop. So he's only a minder. It wasn't the grower. He was solely there to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, right.
For the Italians.
Just because I got to that point in the book and I was like, you go on the ride with you, you're like, oh, here we go.
I was so just like, I still remember thinking, oh God, I mean, it was great to find the crop.
Yeah.
But it would have been so much better to catch the bloke that was looking after it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they eventually did, and the detectives worked all out. They said it was a Italian mafia type crop, and he had the money. He was on a plane a couple of days later and didn't want to come back. I think they did bring him back, extradite him back to Melbourne.
Yeah, right.
I don't know, but later on the local coppers, it was 2 semi-trailers loads of marijuana. They took it down the local tip and burnt it. They didn't even invite me to the party.
Would have been one almighty high.
Would have been a very good party to be down here.
Yeah, I was going to say it would have been one almighty high. That's for sure. So we mentioned like you. So you get to your point of you've been in air. So you've been in the air wing for 13 years.
Yep, 13 it was total. Yeah.
When did you know it was time to move on? And what were there signs that you knew that it was time?
I just lost my love of flying. I'd prefer to. It got to the point where I'd prefer to sit there at the office and do nothing rather than just jump in a helicopter to fly around Melbourne. Which is really, if you say that to people, they think, "Are you crazy?"
No, I get it.
But I just lost interest in it. If someone said, "Cameron, you got a job," I go, "Oh no, not another job. I've got to go and fly," or another ambulance job, another car accident, or something like that. It's just I just got sick of the flying. So a mate of mine convinced me to put into the feds for the federal police, and he said you might get a chance to go overseas. They rang me a couple of times over the years and offered me jobs in Canberra or Melbourne, and eventually they offered me one where it was 2 years overseas, just either any of the UN jobs or Solomons or Timor. And Dad did that. Dad went to the Malaya emergency, and I always thought if I ever get my chance to do something like that, I'm doing that.
You're doing it, yeah.
So I took the job.
Was that, and I just want to backtrack for just a sec, was that hard for you to resign from 20 years at that stage with Victoria Police and going into the unknown, or was it exciting?
Oh, I think it was surprisingly easy, only because I lost the love of the job and the flying anyway.
Yep.
If you spend 13 years at the police air wing, to get out, you're going to go back to uniform policing. You're not going to get the prime job. You hadn't been in the mainstream policing for 13 years. So if I wanted to be promoted to a sergeant, I'd have to go back out the street, work the divisional van for a couple of years, then try and get promoted. And that didn't appeal to me whatsoever.
Yeah, and you weren't... Detective wasn't really the option either. So.
No, because again, I'd have to go back out in the street
Yeah.
and get some good figures and apply to become a detective. So that, you know, I'd always said if I was going to leave the air wing, I was going to leave the air wing for a good job. Yeah. And like I said, you know, the feds rang me up and said we got jobs in Canberra uniform. I wasn't going to leave the air wing to go back to uniform. So, but when they said overseas service for 2 years, it was very easy to sign on the dotted line then. I think I was out within a couple of weeks. I had 2 weeks off, and then I was in Canberra.
So explain to us, Cam, because federal police is a little bit different to state police. What was obviously you accepted the job, but did you have to learn a whole different set of legislations and being federal and to state legislation and
Well, if the feds, well, apart from the uniform part, the feds are divided into two. So there's uniform policing, and the feds that are the uniform coppers, general duties police for Canberra, and then there's national part, which is the investigations all around the country and overseas.
Yep.
And they concentrate on federal law. But federal law and state law isn't that different.
Oh, okay.
So the majority of our training, I think it was about 9 weeks, and that included our overseas stuff as well. So I think it was about 6 weeks, I think, was the conversion.
Yep.
And I don't find it that difficult to learn federal law because there was always similarities. And when you've got something to compare it to, it's a lot easier to learn it rather than learning it fresh.
Yeah. Because you went under a new scheme, didn't you? You went under the... I
went under the lateral... what they call the lateral program.
So what's that?
Well, what happened was the government... When it comes to overseas service or UN jobs, the federal police have always done it. Because the UN... The responsibility of the UN is a federal government responsibility. So when they needed police to go to UN jobs like Cyprus, they would take them from the feds. And they got all these great gigs for years. When the Solomon Islands kicked off, and they wanted to put lots of coppers in the Solomon Islands, and then Timor, and then a couple more UN gigs like Sudan popped up, they didn't have enough coppers to go.
Yeah.
Trained coppers don't grow on trees. So what they did is they farmed out, they put their feelers out to the states to say who wants to come to the federal police and do overseas service. And they created this lateral entry program where they would get state coppers with experience that can be put into a foreign country and be coppers without having to go through all the stuff and the years and years of training that they only had to give 6 weeks training to.
Makes
so
sense.
I found myself in the Solomon Islands after a couple of months, and I was surrounded by coppers, trained coppers from Victoria, and but lo and behold, they were still short, so the state started giving them coppers. But I already jumped ship.
So obviously joining the AFP, is it a vigorous way of is it a hard process compared to what it was for when you joined the Victorian police, or is it different?
There was no physical. There was definitely a medical.
Yep.
And an interview and an assessment test. There was nothing was given. I mean, you had to do that same test that everyone else did.
So is that the same?
Same interview that everyone else did.
Is that the same in the in the state police as well? You have to do your aptitude test, or when you first joined?
Yeah.
So same thing.
Yeah, same sort of aptitude test or an IQ test.
Yep.
And then an interview. So nothing, it's just like getting into another police force, except I didn't have to do a physical.
Yep.
I did a medical. They figured if I weren't the copper that they were taking wasn't totally fit, that's fine, because he had all this police experience.
Yep.
That was their sole role. They wanted experienced coppers to be going overseas to satisfy the government's need to send coppers there without drawing from their own ranks of people they didn't have or retraining people. And it turned out that's how they serviced the Solomon Islands and Timor for nearly 8-9 years.
So you mentioned the Solomons, and you went over in 2006.
2006, yeah.
Yeah, and you're also in that year. You were also awarded the Royal Humanitarian Society Australian Silver Medal for bravery.
Yep.
For rescuing Ron.
Yeah, Ron
Right.
Palm, the
Yeah.
sailor. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what's that medal?
Well, as far as I understand it, it's been around since the 1800s. It's for saving life. Patronage is under the Queen, well, the King now. So it's Royal Humane Society of Australasia. They have the same sort of award system as Australia does with bravery medals. They have a gold medal, a silver medal, a bronze, and then a certificate. And yeah, I was awarded that in, what was that,
2006, yep.
Yeah, Government House. Yeah.
Yeah. What looking back now, and you obviously talked about, that day and that rescue, a sense of pride for.
Well, I'm not so sure. Sort of imposter syndrome for me, because I remember sitting there. I got the silver medal, and the pilot and wind chopper I got the bronze. And I remember sitting there, and there was a guy in front of me, the family of their dad had drowned trying to save his son from drowning. He
Yeah.
saved his son, but he had drowned. And they gave him a posthumous medal. And then there was a guy in front of him that was a lecturer at La Trobe Uni when that gunman attacked the place.
Yep.
And he wrestled the gun off this bloke. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm amongst some pretty big company.
Yeah.
And, I'd always looked at that rescue with Ron Palmer as a bit of failure on my behalf, because of the fear and the worry and forgetting bits and thinking, it wasn't, as time goes by, you don't think it's as bad as what it was at the time. And you start to doubt your own, your belief. So I felt quite uncomfortable there.
Yeah, okay.
Especially amongst those people.
Yeah.
I remember reading the story of this lecturer at the university. I think it was La Trobe. I remember, wow, amazing. I don't think I've ever done that. And here he gets this, a medal the same as him. I'm thinking, no, something's not right here.
See, I sit across from you, and I'm glad that I'm sitting across from you, not doing this via Zoom. I think you're a bit harsh on yourself, mate.
Oh, look, but that's PTSD. I mean, at the time I didn't know I had it.
Yeah.
That PTSD didn't happen until, come to fruition, or its head until 10 years later.
Yeah.
Actually, 10 years, almost to the day.
Almost 10 years, yeah. You talk about that.
So, and I didn't know at the time that my loss of that love of flying was also PTSD. And I didn't know all the other stuff that happened to me prior to that was PTSD.
All the flow-on
until
effects,
now,
yeah.
you look back and you think, that's PTSD's doing.
Science,
PTSD affects your self-worth.
Yeah.
So therefore, after this major trauma, you think you're hopeless and you didn't do a good job. That's the way I feel.
Yeah.
So that makes sense to me now.
But at the time...
It was imposter syndrome,
Yep.
and I felt very uncomfortable and couldn't wait to get the photos and get the hell out of there.
Yeah, right.
In fact, I never wore the medal.
Yeah, really? Yeah,
Very
right.
rarely. In fact, I can't remember. I actually do. Last Anzac Day, I had them in my pocket.
Yeah.
Still to this day. Because it's that uncomfortable with it.
And I understand it. I get it that there's, and like you said, imposter syndrome of there's a lot of guys out there that would be as if they could be, and
yeah. We talked about that over dinner.
We talked about that over dinner, and I understand it, but it's something that I said to Banksy when we did his podcast this afternoon, that mate. It's not just like, and I understand where you're totally at. I understand it, but I think it represents your crew as well, and I think you should wear that medal with pride.
Yeah, it does, but that doesn't. That I think the PTSD and the self-worth's far more powerful than that.
I'd agree.
It's one of the symptoms of PTSD. Put it together with all the others, and it's pretty powerful. And I reckon it's probably the most difficult one to handle is the loss of pride in yourself, or there's the loss of enjoyment, you can handle that. There's the depression, you can take drugs for that.
Yeah.
But the loss of self-worth and thinking you're a failure, I think is probably the most powerful and underestimated symptom of PTSD.
I don't think it's like PTSD. I think it's depression as well, anxiety.
Yeah,
it's the same.
There's
thing.
drugs for depression.
Yeah,
You can't get medication for loss of self-worth.
no, and I know. Like you've read my manuscript of my book, and you, mate, I know exactly what you're talking about because
it's very hard to fix.
the self-worth when you're at your lowest point, you don't care.
No,
you don't care.
No.
You don't care that you're wearing unironed shirts. You don't care that you don't care how you look. You don't care that you've got a beard. There's no care.
But how many times has someone said, "Yeah, but it shouldn't be like that. You should be like this because you should be proud of that." It doesn't matter how many times someone says
That's
that.
right.
It doesn't matter if they pin a ribbon on your thing and say, "Hey, well done."
Yeah.
I think to a certain point that makes other people feel good about it, not necessarily yourself.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I used to say that every time the people that give out the medals get the best time for some of it because they get a nice party and everyone else goes around like me and I just can't wait to get out there.
Yeah.
But like I said, self-worth can really, it's damaging, but it can really send you to some really dark places.
Yeah.
And stick it together with depression, and then that is just a terrible recipe for some really sinister stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's self-worth very hard to fix.
And it takes a long time.
It takes a long time, and I don't necessarily think you fix it. You sort of live with it and are a bit easier on yourself rather than it be cured.
You find ways to manage it. And
one of my ways to manage is when if I go to Anzac Day, I slip the rack of medals in my pocket. That keeps me happy to the point where I've got them there, and I feel good about that.
Yep.
And I've had more than sometimes, but very, very, very rarely.
Yeah. So it's an uneasy that's an uneasy medal for you.
And it will always be.
Yeah.
But I'm fine with that. That's not like I'm disappointed. I don't get up in the morning and say I'm so disappointed I don't wear these things. They're not on display. They're in a drawer in my bedside table.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Seems that everyone else has got a problem with it. Or everyone else has got a problem they're not worn. But I'm fine with that.
Yeah. No, that's
just let me be.
Yeah.
That's the way I am.
And that's how you deal with it.
And that's how I deal with it.
Yeah. Then there's nothing wrong with that.
That might be the way it is forever.
Yeah.
Who knows?
But I think what you're saying is there's no right or wrong way to do it. That's just how you deal with it.
Yep.
There's others that same thing. They never. There's one that springs to mind, and there's a veteran that he won the posthumous Victoria Cross. He didn't care about getting a Medal of Gallantry. That wasn't his stock. He put it off for 2 years, and in the end was basically forced to go to Government House to pick it up. He didn't care about that. That wasn't what he was about. So I think there's no right or wrong way.
Like I said, that self-worth can get away from yourself, and you got to watch it.
Absolutely. And so we'll go back to the Sollies, and what were you on? Like obviously the Sollies had kicked off pretty bad. Like it was pretty bad over there in 2006. The riots. What was your role going over with the AFP?
Well, when you get there, you usually get a role. Most people go into general duties to help local coppers. I was a project officer for the Assistant Commissioner of Specialist Operations. So my first job was to disarm what was left of what they call the Staff Force. So Staff Force was a certain section of the police force that during what they call the tensions, so the race murders and stuff, were a bit out of control. So after the tensions were settled and Ramsey, the Regional Assistant Commissioner of Solomon Islands, the feds were there, with the military and the government assistance, the Staff Force had sort of spread themselves around amongst certain police stations and got themselves really good jobs. So my job was to effectively break them up. So I did that mostly from the desk, under the direction of the Assistant Commissioner, and most people there would have a shadow, a Solomon Islands person that is their shadow that they look after, and mine was one of the Commissioner's aides. So I worked with him to do projects. That was my job.
So how long was that deployment for? Like, how long were you
The
over
initial
there?
one was 4 months, but I went probably to the Solomon Islands about a dozen times over the next, from 2006 to 2011. But the longest deployment I did was that one. That was 4 months.
And you, because at that stage, so were you working sort of hand in hand with the military over there as well at that point?
Well, the military there were there to keep us safe.
Yeah, right.
So during the riots, when the riots went off when I was over there, that was probably one of the only times I actually got in the car and went somewhere. They were there, supposedly there to keep us safe, but I didn't see any military there during the riots. Funny about that. So they were the backup for us.
Yeah.
Pretty cushy job though, because the riots went for about. The initial riots was about 24 hours, the first one, where they did most of the damage. And then the next night, the government had locked down the town. They'd virtually declared a curfew. Anyone out after 10 p.m. was to be locked up. And that was the second and the third nights, and then it slowly got back together, but half the town had been burnt down. So yeah, the military was there to support us with manpower and bigger firearms if we needed.
So was it a government coup, or what was the what
No,
were
the riots started. They had some national elections, and I won't get into the politics of the Solomon Islands and stuff like that, but some of the locals thought that the Chinese community, which was big in Honiara, had paid money to undermine the elections to get the person they wanted to win. So then locals went and started a riot at Parliament House when the announcement got made, filtered their way to Chinatown, burnt it down. That's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, right.
So as the riots were starting at Parliament House, everyone got dressed into their gear and headed out to cars. And my initial job was to go past the riots and pick up one of the AFP bosses that was in the other side of town, in one of his houses, and bring him back safe, which we never made it back to the base because we got caught up in the riots. And that's we sort of moved with them as they got into Chinatown. And it was a matter of containing it to Chinatown, really, until they ran out of puff. Because it took them seconds to light the whole town up.
Yeah, right.
And they eventually ran out of puff and filtered off. But in the early hours of that morning, they overran a hotel that we were all at, and they burnt that to the ground. We were outnumbered most of the time. And then the following night, it was about keeping the curfew, and that was righteous in itself. I mean, I remember coming up to shopping, like an old shopping centre's been looted. It was 4 a.m, and they looted this shopping centre, and we're supposed to lock these blokes up, and it's just, there's hundreds of them. I signed out 2 police cars in 2 days. They're brand new, and both of them, one of them was burnt to the ground, and the second day the other one was a write-off.
Yeah,
Just through throwing rocks at us, and no windscreens, and our riot shields were cracking, and it was just mayhem.
So were you, if you were under threat over there, were you able to use your weapons, or?
We were armed, but I mean, they are not, so therefore you're not supposed to. I mean, you're only supposed to use it in life and death situations, or where you fear that someone's going to die or be seriously injured, or yourself. You know, I remember that the capsicum spray we had certainly got a workout. In one occasion, my baton certainly got a workout. You know, these guys looting the shops wouldn't stop, and you know. I remember when we tried to arrest these guys that we were getting pelted by rocks. And I always said these Solomon Islands, they can throw a rock, and it's usually some volcanic light thing, but when it hits, it's got sharp edges. I remember one hitting a mate's ballistic helmet and taking a 1/2 inch gouge out of it. Just as if someone had hit it with a knife. And they were pelting our car, and I remember us getting our right shields over the top, because the rocks were coming from the bush. The guys we were about to arrest just scurried away, and the rocks started falling. They were landing everywhere. We got under our right shields, got ourselves to the corner of the car, and managed to get in, but we had no windscreens left because they had all been pelted. So I remember getting in and holding my right shield against the window of the driver, so he got pelted. Graham, I'm still good friends with Graham. Graham Privilege is his name. He's still good friends to this day. And I remember me putting in reverse to get the hell out of there. I remember a rock hitting my right shield and half of it breaking away. Full stick reverse, trying to get it. We took out the side of a power pole. He put it in drive, and as they're pelting the back of us, we'd hit this ditch. The diff of the car had twisted about 30 degrees, and we limped it back to base. There wasn't one window left or one panel that wasn't damaged, and the car was a write-off. And I was, you talk about the rescue bit. I think about that one incident now, and I laugh with Graham about it. How the hell we didn't get seriously hurt still amazes me to this day.
Yeah, like rocks and like volcanic rocks are, I know what they're like. They're
I remember running a gauntlet. We were, on the first night we were evacuating people. Were in a Land Cruiser evacuating injured coppers back to base, and you had to go through the riots and along the main highway to the base.
Yep.
And we had the two drivers, because there was no windscreen in the car. The windscreen was a piece of mesh.
Yep.
Thank God they hadn't known about Molotov cocktails. We'll all be dead. But the mesh, wire mesh, like big chicken wire, was the windscreen. The two guys in the front, the driver and his observer, had ballistic helmets with the visors down and vests over its shoulder. And we were in the back with the injured coppers lying on the back of the Land Cruiser, and we'd cover them with some shields. And I remember going full bore in a convoy of 3 Land Cruisers. We were the second one. As we passed these, like there was a marketplace, and as we passed the marketplace, you can see the moon and these shadows, and all of a sudden we get pelted. They're throwing everything, rocks, bricks. They threw a star picket that hit the side of the car. One we ran over, and it just made a hell of a noise. Then they had this barricade in front of us and across the road that they started to set on fire, and we barreled through that. Poor driver, no passenger of the car behind, got hit by a rock, smashed his head open. He ended up getting evacuated to Australia the next day. And we limped back all the way to base and thinking, this is ridiculous. It was mayhem. Mayhem for 2 days. But still the best fun I ever had. I look back at it now and say, look, I'm lucky to be alive, but I still sit together with mates that were there and we have a joke about it.
Mate, it's funny, isn't it, in times of, like you sit back now and enjoy, you can have a cold beer about it and have a laugh, but at the time, some pretty hair-raising. Yeah, but that's the stuff, and I remember you talked to Banksy about the really hairy stuff he's involved in, and you think, did it bother you or worry you? No, not until later. Yeah.
So at the time, the adrenaline's pumping and you're doing what you're trying to do and you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
Like I said, we had a ball. And then later, like the rescue, on the way back, and they look up, you realise what you've just done.
Yeah.
And suddenly the adrenaline fades and you think, holy fuck.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that again.
Yeah. Well, like you said earlier on in the podcast, where you were trying to untangle that rope and you weren't connected. Like, you just things that you did that you just and when you think back, you think, holy shit, like,
Well, adrenaline keeps you functioning.
Yeah. Keeps
you going, and when it wears off, and you notice it wears off, you start, you get that little bit of a shiver and that nervy thing, and you think, holy crap.
Yeah, I know exactly. Certainly, some fires you sit there and go, oh shit, like, and at the time you're just in the heat of the battle, and then when you think back, you think, oh shit, that was actually a bit closer than you think, and you reassess things and go, oh shit, yeah, okay, yeah, I know exactly what you're saying, and yeah, absolutely. So Cam, you come back from that deployment, and then in 2009 you were deployed to regional Victoria for the devastating Black Saturday bushfires, claiming 173 lives.
Yep.
What was your role here, and how did you process this terrible tragedy as this was in your home state?
We were based, my unit was based in Melbourne at the time, even though we're federal police for the whole state. I had a unit that were based in Melbourne. So our first deployment was chainsaws and recovery gear, full drives to head down to Churchill. Now Churchill was this little town at Latrobe Valley. The whole town was burnt out. So initially we went down there, one is to search houses. Some search teams had already been there, and if they found evidence that a body had been in the house or was in the house, which is usually the smell, they would mark the front gate post, so search teams can go back in later and have a look for the bits. So we did that. So we'd come across a house that hadn't been searched yet, and we'd go and have a quick look through. Then it sort of got into the point where we'd use our chainsaw to clear roads. There were also people that were still missing. So we'd patrol or search for them. So we were in Churchville for about, I think it was about 4 or 5 days. Then we got a call to go to Marysville, and again Marysville was almost 100% destroyed. So we'd finished our shift at Churchill, got in the cars again, and by this time we had our whole team had come down from Canberra, so there was, at least 50 of us. So we went up to Marysville. Our first job there was to relieve the Victorian coppers who'd been working straight a few days, even though we'd worked 2 days. So we manned the roadblocks just to give them a bit of relief, to stop people going in and out. Because believe it or not, there was people going out of Marysville and stealing shit.
Yep.
Now, I mean, if I caught someone stealing shit from a fire that people had died in, I wouldn't be too happy about it. So, and then the next few days was again searching for people. There was a whole list of people that they needed to locate. There was an elderly lady from memory we had to try and find, so we searched bush near where she was living. We did that for a couple of days, and I'm not sure whether they ever found her. There was another couple that had stayed up to Marysville for a long weekend, and they hadn't been heard of. We started a search for them. By that time, Victoria Police had brought a helicopter in. So, because of my background, I jumped on that, which is great because I knew the pilot and the crewman. I'd worked with them for years. And we could work and search. We searched for them, eventually found them. A car had come across their car. Unfortunately, they died trying to escape the fire. I think we did about at least another 12 days at Marysville, mainly searching for people that are missing. During that time, one of the local fires got hit by a fallen tree and died, which is pretty sad. That sort of devastated the fires up there. Yep. There was some guarding of scenes. Some of the guys did that, where bodies were. I think the main hotel, I wanted to guard that. There was a couple of the owners had died in there. So that was it. It was really sort of, keeping an eye on the town, stopping looters and finding people that were missing.
It's something that I can relate to because I've just recently been deployed with the floods up in New South Wales, and same thing, looters. They just come and they're the lowest of the low.
They're filth. Absolute filth.
Disgusting. Like, and prying into, people's, this absolute tragedy that occurred. It's, you just think, have you not got a moral compass? Like,
no, they don't have any.
And it's disgusting. Like, absolutely disgusting. And like you said, mate, if you caught any of them, they wouldn't live to see another day.
No, and I'd say that if someone wanted to do, I'd turn a blind eye. I just have absolutely no respect for people that do that.
No.
These people lost everything, and what they do have is sit in the fire and they go and steal it. It's ridiculous, but
yeah, absolutely.
Fires. I never liked On the area ambulance, I did a lot of fire jobs. I never liked them.
Yep.
The injuries are just ghastly. The smell is just terrible.
Yep.
The smell of burnt skin. I don't want to trigger you and tell me if I do, but it's indescribable.
Yep.
And I remember being at Churchill and Marysville, and the smell of that burnt, decaying body, which could be a cow, because everywhere you look, there was cows upside down, turned into balloons.
Yep.
But that smells the same. So you walk into a house and you can smell, even though it's just ash, you can tell there's decaying flesh there.
Yep.
And I'll tell a story that one day I was sitting in the area ambulance. This isn't in the book. I don't think it's in the book. And I remember getting airborne for a job, and the job come over the radio just as we got we're about 50 feet off the ground, just flying out at the airport. And I remember hearing on the ambulance radio that it's a burns job. There's a guy, however many old, got caught in a house fire and was burnt legs and arms. And I remember smelling that smell in the helicopter. And I turned to the rest of the crew and said, "Do you smell anything?" And the pilot looked at me, shit his pants, because he thought, if I'm smelling something, it must be burnt electrical or something like that. And he says, "No, I can't. What does it smell like?" I turned to the ambo and he couldn't smell anything. I knew then that I was just reminding of that smell of burnt, decaying flesh.
Yep.
I'll never forget that. And that's merely by someone saying, "You're going to a burns job." Because I hated them.
Yep. Yeah, it's something that I can relate to.
For some reason, I didn't like them.
Yeah.
Even the treatment for someone in burns, it's just, you think, it's ghastly injury, it's painful, it's just,
Yeah.
And the smell was just terrible.
It's, something that see, for me, and I know a lot of fireys as well, we would rather, after dealing with the floods that we've just dealt with, for us, floods are more devastating than fire, because fire is, which you've been on the ground, you've seen it, it's quick, suppressed, you lose everything and you start again. Floods are more devastating because you feel intrusive of people. You're throwing out clothes, you're throwing out photo albums, you're pushing shit out of their houses, it stinks, it's shit work, and they've lost everything, and they throw it like you're pulling gyprock off bloody walls because you can't leave it as is, they need to start again, and you just leave it out on the driveways to just decay away and wait for the council, and there's
rotten food there.
Yeah, and it's for us, we just, like, after doing 18 months of floods, we just said, can we not see flood water for a while, because we were over it. Like, we're over it, and we said, can we just see some flames? Because we actually haven't seen flames for 18 months. It's just been flood water. And
isn't that sad when
you
actually want to see a fire?
Yeah, it is. And I think, but just because we dealt with it we dealt with the devastation and and it too, being on the ground of people who have lost everything, you see them at their worst day.
Oh, and of course. And what are you going back to? You're going back to your unharmed house.
That's right. And I mean, and there's no, for me, I didn't have anything that I could. I didn't have anything that I could, like. I'd never dealt with a flood before this. The 18 months that I'd been in floods, and as fires, I could use that past experience to talk to people, and I was a bit of a loss. I was like, well, what do I do? Like, what do I say? What do I do? Like, and like, no amount of training prepared me for what I just went through, and I know exactly what you're talking about.
No, they can't. Well, they can't train you for that, can they?
No, they can't.
Then you get this bit of survivor guilt. It's sort of like a survivor guilt that you get to go home and you've lost everything. What do you say to these people? That's
right. All you can say is, I just got to a point where I just said, my heart's breaking. I've got nothing to say, but my heart's breaking for you. That's all I could say, because some of them, like, especially up at home and where I live, it was their 5th flood in 18 months. Like, they'd lost everything 4 times, and this was the 5th time. And like, what do you say to that? Like, you can't. And I'm going home to a nice warm bed and a shower, and at the end of the day, some of them are still in their same clothes, you know, a couple of weeks later, and it's
How much more can a person take?
that's right, and I think it's like for you, you'll never forget that
No.
those those fires. They were just such a
Devastating, you know.
Absolutely.
And the ferocity of the fire, I couldn't believe it. Seen from the air, I got a real good picture of the way it worked uphill. And so these massive trees just gone. And you see where the heat was, how much destruction there was.
Yep.
That, to dwell on this same job, but the people that got stuck there in their car, I mentioned in the book, you can see that they've obviously come around this track to avoid it, and they've come across, they did a U and then come back onto the main track, and a tree's fallen. They couldn't get past it.
Yeah. Yep.
And you can see that uphill towards that track, every tree, as if it had been chopped at the base, was just burnt to a cinder, a long pointy cinder that was laying the way the fire front had gone.
Yep.
And that's it, apart from dust.
Yep. I know. Yeah.
And you think that's a big fire. That's
ferocious.
A lot of heat.
That's ferocious.
Just going right up the hill.
Yep.
And you see the poor guys, people who got out of the car and tried to run, and one made it 30, 40 metres, the other one's a bit around the corner, and
that's where you know that where trees are just pushed over.
Someone had just taken all the branches off them, and all the leaves, and left a black pointy stick, and just laid over.
Yep.
And you can, I think you see it in one of the photos.
Yeah.
You can see the trees laying there, and you think, wow, that fire. It's intense.
Fast and ferocious.
Whereas on the other side, the trees were all upright. So that part of that front had moved up and moved.
Yep. Mate, I tell you, it's one thing seeing a wildfire at its absolute, when it's at its absolute peak. It's like Banksy said in his podcast, and like you've said with down the rescue and in the water, and it's adrenaline. Like you are there, and you are just watching Mother Nature do her thing.
Yep.
And it is just.
Well, you never win.
No,
you never win against Mother Nature.
No, mate, not at all. And you're just sitting there going, and it's fascinating watching a wildfire when it's absolutely. It's terrifying, but and you're hearing the roar of the steam train and the.
And it is a roar. It is a roar.
And you just look and going, what am I doing here? Like, am I sane standing on the end of a hose? And it's, mate, it's definitely, I know what you're saying, and it's, So you did that, and then in 2011, you deployed to Christchurch in New Zealand for humanitarian relief after a 6.3 magnitude earthquake hit Christchurch, claiming 185 lives.
Yep.
This deployment was very similar to where you were in 2009 doing humanitarian.
It was kind of sort of different deployment. We went there for about 2.5 or 3 weeks from memory, I think. There was different roles we did. We got sworn in as New Zealand coppers, so we had some police powers. A bunch of people did different stuff. My initial was really hearts and minds, I suppose, initial week. I remember having to go to schools and lecture kids, because what happened was 80% of the police force in Christchurch either had a house that was destroyed or knew someone that was killed or was related or something like that. So they weren't coming to work. So there was no police force. And they wanted to make everything as normal as possible. And I remember having to go to a couple of schools to lecture kids just to make them feel safe about being in Christchurch. I remember one kid had lost his dad or mum, and I was giving this kid a lecture and talked about who's been affected by the earthquake, and this kid says, I lost my mum or dad, I can't remember which one. I was, oh God. And then the second week, I was teamed up with a New Zealand copper from Auckland. We had a police car and we patrol the dead zones. One thing the news didn't show you anyone was the amount of devastation in Christchurch.
Yeah, I was going to ask
Like, if you watch the news, you think there's 3 buildings collapsed. But the whole town of the city was devastated. There were suburbs that weren't lived in anymore. They couldn't live in anymore.
Yeah, right.
So we would patrol those suburbs in the town, again, because people were going in there and looting these houses. There's this amazing thing called liquefaction, because Christchurch, however old it is, was built over an old, ancient riverbed. And because there's still moisture and sand and silt underneath, it's like, someone explained it to me, it's like when you pour new concrete and you screed it, and if you shake it, the water comes to the surface, the dirty water. Well, when the earthquake happened, all the dirty water and goo, grey shit, had come to the surface and bubbled up in the middle of the street, consumed cars and destroyed houses. So this liquefaction had filled houses with silty grey water coming up from the old riverbed.
Yeah, right.
And cracks you could put your hand in on the wall. So the whole suburbs were deemed not livable. So we had to patrol them to stop the looters going in and taking people's TVs and stuff like that. And believe it or not, that people were doing it.
So was that over there, like, you have you been back since?
No, I'm dying to go back.
Yeah, right. Because I've heard, because like, as you say, it's in the news for a short period of time, but you wonder how they've progressed in the years gone by since the earthquake and.
Look, I heard not so much, which is weird because I know they have what's called a part of their tax is there's a levy for earthquakes, and there's a lot of money in this earthquake levy, and that's supposed to rebuild towns after, because they've had so many earthquakes over 100 years. They've got this levy, so it's not like they don't have the money to rebuild. But I think there's other, shops are still existing in containers, and it's been like a real container city. But I don't know. I'd love to know how many of these suburbs have been rebuilt again. Because the houses look normal, but you're getting closer and they're just, they're just gone. The cracks right through. I mean, even the main police station in town. I remember going there for a briefing. The main police station was 10 or so stories. I remember walking up the stairwell because we couldn't use the elevator, and the stairwell had cracks in it. I could slide my hand into, and they assured us it was safe. But they assured us that was safe, those cracks, while they got the wrecking ball demolishing the 10-storey building next door. So it got to the point where I thought, I don't want to go in there for a briefing anymore. They can have the briefing in the car park.
I can understand why.
Tremors were going off. These aftershocks were going off while we were there. And they are just massive. And I sort of wonder what makes an aftershock not an earthquake, because it can be just as bad as the original one.
Yeah.
And I remember one that was going off so bad, I was asleep and the head of my bed was hitting the wall. Bang, bang, bang. And I remember my off-sider in the room, the bed next to me, jumping over me, running into the car park because it's the safest place to be. And I got up and ran like hell because this whole building I thought was going to collapse. And that was just an aftershock. That was another one of those deployments where I thought, I can't wait for this to be over.
Yeah. And you mentioned, and that was a couple of weeks, that deployment, or was that?
It was about 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks, I think.
Yeah, right. Yeah, very nerve-wracking time over there.
Yeah, well, I remember being at there was a shop had been half demolished. It was a suburb outside of the main part of Christchurch, and the guy had his wheelbarrow, he's picking up the bricks from this brick wall that had fallen over. And we're talking to him about, you probably shouldn't be stealing these bricks. I mean, they're not going to use them to rebuild, but, you should find the owner, or at least say, because otherwise you're actually stealing it.
Yeah.
And just as we're standing there's an aftershock hits, and everything starts rocking, and we're standing next to the brick wall that didn't collapse, and it crosses your mind that you think maybe you should take a couple of steps back. And of course you do, and you think, this is just... I've never been in an earthquake before in my life.
Yeah.
But I've been through about a dozen aftershocks.
So it makes you think what what a real earthquake's like if the aftershocks are like that.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, far out.
Yeah, it was 6.3, I think it was. You know?
Jeez.
There was amazing stories of survival and the stories of devastation. You know?
Yeah. So you finish your deployment and you come back and then you transfer to Melbourne as an investigator working on a number of teams, initially working on major criminal investigation, drug importations,
Yep.
child protection, and then people smuggling.
Yep.
Was that good to get back home and finally not be on deployments as much and get home?
No, I would have continued with the deployments. Just that my unit had moved to Canberra.
Yeah.
I got offered promotion to go up there, but I didn't want to go to Canberra. I wanted to stay in Melbourne. So the deal was that if I stayed in Melbourne, I'd have to go, not take that promotion and go in normal, my current rank.
Yeah.
So, but that was the price I had to pay for staying in Melbourne, so that was fine. But I did enjoy investigations a lot, especially that sort of level. When we talk about major drug importation, we're talking about millions and millions of dollars worth of cocaine or heroin or stuff, major stuff coming in across the border. And with people smuggling, it wasn't just about minor people trying to chase the guys that were making the money. You know, those people smugglers that owned the boats in Indonesia people would pay money to get on the boats, and some of them don't even make it to Christmas Island.
Yeah.
So we were chasing those smugglers, not the lower level stuff. And that was enjoyable too, because that was something I'd never, ever thought about really. But I met some amazing people during that. We interviewed a lot of people that got smuggled on boats. Some of them I say really needed to come here. Some of them didn't. Some of them weren't refugees at all. But some I had a lot of empathy for. Some people that had to get out. We talked to them for hours, and I love that. Love that bit. And there was nothing better than getting a smuggler and going over, picking them up and bringing them back.
And letting them face their...
Making them face justice here.
Yep.
Because those people made a lot of money out of someone else's misery.
It's a... Yeah, they really... It was rampant there for a while, wasn't it? Like, it was a really... There was a business for...
It was a business, They were paying... From memory back then, you could pay... Costs vary. It might be half price for a kid, but you could pay up to $10,000 to go from Afghanistan to Australia, and there's no guarantee you're going to get there. But they had this magnificent system of getting people through the borders and onto a boat. Very well planned, but the process they use, you could identify a smuggler by the process they used. And it got to the point where taking statements off, say, people that have made it on a boat, and we'd take statements, and they don't mind talking about the smuggler.
Yeah.
Because they knew the smuggler was making a lot of money out of their situation. And so they'd talk about it. And you look at the system and the process they made it, and you know what's coming next based on the fact that you know who the smuggler is.
Yeah.
And that was good. It's really satisfying because eventually you build up enough information, and there was one smuggler I picked up who was smuggling himself in under a different name. So I picked him up, and he got sentenced to a few years, and then I think he's done those few years now, got sent back home.
Oh, good.
And another one, I extradited another one from Malaysia back to Perth, and he was responsible for a couple of boats that never made it. So it was I think it was very satisfying working in people smuggling.
Yeah, absolutely. It's rewarding to go on the hunt and get them and make them face justice. Because, like you see, I remember you used to see on the news some of those boats, mate. They wouldn't even call them a boat.
No.
They were like...
Well, of course, the smuggler would show them a very nice boat. And then when they get there, they've already paid their money, it's dark, they get in this thing and they're lucky to float.
Yeah.
The picture they probably got shown was some other boat owned by a fisherman.
Yeah, just a really terrible...
But they were desperate. They're desperate. They paid their money. They're probably the only money they had. They got all the way through from Afghanistan all the way.
Yeah.
They had another 30 hours to go, and they were in Australia, and they had a chance to get in. So, of course, they're going to get on it.
Pretty sad, isn't it? The way some of them finished, and
And some of them never made it.
Yeah, which really, really sad. And so a couple of years later, you were diagnosed with PTSD and major depression. Did you, obviously, hindsight now with your PTSD journey and where you're at and where you started?
Yep.
At that time, did you know something was up and you needed help, or not at that point?
I used to joke about it just before I had this major collapse, that, if anyone's got PTSD, I'm going to have it. And I used to joke about it because I never thought anything was wrong with it, so I could, In hindsight, I would say that it started in the middle of the 90s and gradually got worse. Now they know what the symptoms are. But at the time, I had no idea what was going on when I had my major breakdown, which was on a train on the way home from work. So I was on this train and I'd travelled every night on this train after work, and so I had like a micro sleep. And I woke up and had no idea where I was, and all of a sudden I just overcome with emotion. Like, imagine if someone said you got 1 minute to live, and it's total grief, and I was just tears running down, pooling on the floor, and I'm hyperventilating, I'm shaking, can't get any air, and I've got no idea what's going on. Absolutely no idea. And then it stops. I'm thinking everyone's going to be looking at this weirdo. And then it starts again, and it came in waves. Had no idea. Scary as. I didn't think I was having a heart attack or anything like that, but I had no concept of what was going on. And I got myself off the train, and I remember going to the car because my wife, Sue, and the kids were there. The kids usually greet me. They, at that age, they were, I think, 8 and 5 or something. And they'd wind down the window and they'd sit on the windowsill of the door and wave to Dad. He loved it, And I'd just walk to this time they weren't waving and smiling. They could see the look on my face. We got to the car. I couldn't even open the car door. I just stood there. And my wife didn't know what was going on. She said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I can't do this anymore. I have no idea what that meant." I got in the car, dropped the kids off somewhere, and got someone to look after the kids and took me home, and the neighbours sat in the car with me. So I couldn't even get out of the car. And these bouts of being upset and tears and shaking and hyperventilating weren't going. They were just coming back. Yeah. It got to I eventually got dragged inside, sat on the corner of the bed, and for some reason I thought my past has come back to haunt me. I thought this has got to do with my career. This has got to do with all that shit that's I've seen or done. So I knew that, but didn't know it was PTSD. Yeah. And that's what I thought. I can't do anymore. I can't do this police work anymore. I've had enough. My wife, luckily that day, had gone out with a friend of hers for lunch who was a psych nurse. And I remember my wife ringing a couple of people, and police welfare said, "Get a CAT team there," which is a psych nurse, a doctor, and sometimes a copper, and they come in the house and they lock up nutcases. That's what we use them for. Yeah. So saying to a police officer, "We're going to send a CAT team to come and get you," was like saying, "We're going to send the SOG in to do, to rough you up."
Yep.
And there's no way I was going to let a CAT team in here because that means I'm nuts. So my wife said, "How about I get a Nadia, a friend of the family's, a friend of hers, the psych nurse, to come?" I said, "I haven't met this lady before." My wife knew her really well. She's sitting on the bed. First time I've ever met this lady. I'm just a blubbering mess. She manages to calm me down. Don't know how she did that. And I made a deal with her. I said, if I can settle down and go to sleep and go to the doctors in the morning, I can stay. If I can't settle down, she wants to take me to a psych ward.
Yeah, right.
And I managed to settle myself down. Slept like a log, almost unconscious. I was exhausted. Every bone and muscle in my body ached, like I'd ran a marathon. And I got up in the morning and I walked into my doctor who I've known for 20 years, and she looked at me and she knew exactly what was going on. And that was it. I got diagnosed. I think it takes about a month and a half to diagnose someone. Eventually got diagnosed, and that started the ball rolling to get better. But I never worked another day after that. Never went back to work.
And just happened.
Just happened.
Yeah, just.
And that, you know, that it's funny when I say, you know, I can't do this again, because I have mates that have since been diagnosed, and it's the same thing they've said. They've said, I can't do this again.
Yeah.
So I don't know what it is about that I knew enough that it was my past and that I've got to stop.
Yeah.
But until the doctor said the words PTSD, which was the next day, I had no idea. I think everyone else did.
Yeah. And
Like,
just...
the psych nurse obviously knew what was going on.
Just
That sat with me, Nadia. She obviously knew. My doctor knew straight away. Almost my doctor said, look, I've been expecting this to happen one day. Her brother's a copper and... Yeah.
Just, and I guess in a sense, all the years of trauma and just everything just kept building up, and like they say, like, you know, it's like a bottle that just slowly fills up and up and up, and no matter how many, I'm good, or, you know, I'm fine, it's all good, nothing, no, it affects you.
Well, you don't know how big your bottle is.
That's right.
But it seems to be that, and I say this all the time, you know, as coppers and fireheads, and we think, well, like, as the book says, 10 feet tall and bulletproof, but we're not. And we seem to deny, you know, the normal response for any really traumatic event is guilt, sadness, blame, anger,
Yeah.
all these things, and we don't accept, as emergency services worker, we don't accept any of them.
No.
So if you're going to trauma after trauma after trauma, and there's normal responses as any of these things, and you don't accept any of them to happen to you, what happens when your brain has had too much and says it's about time? Because it's got to go somewhere. And it does. It sits there, and eventually you have that meltdown that I had.
Yeah.
And it all comes flooding back.
And the floodgates open. And
The floodgates are open. You're finally dealing with the stuff that you should have been dealt with ages ago.
Yeah.
So I think it's much better that we accept the fact that, hey, when we go to that fatal accident and we see that person that dies, we can be angry and we can be upset and we can be sad for them. And that's normal. And deal with it. Deal with it then.
And I think too, in your early days, like, and yeah, I've done the maths on when you were diagnosed. You'd been in 30 years at that stage, like.
Yeah, it was about 30 years.
30 years. So 85 you joined.
85, yeah.
And 2015, there's a lot of.
Well, it was almost 30 years to the week, I think.
Yeah. So, and.
Actually, it might have been about 5 days off the day I graduated. Yeah, 30 years. Yeah.
And you'd been through so much, you'd seen so much, and I think in the early days there probably wasn't a lot of like the AARs and the after action reviews, and there was no real debriefs. It was just get on with the job, mate. You'd go tomorrow and turn up again and do your shift. And
well, that was most of my career was. Yeah, I mean, a fatal accident on the air ambulance, you could do 1 or 2 a night. And that was really, I suppose, apart from, say, transfers of really critically ill people from country hospitals to Melbourne, most of our work was probably car accidents.
Yeah.
And fatal accidents. We never went to a minor one. It was always someone was either dead or going to die if you couldn't get them to hospital, and usually the best way was by helicopter. And it was always a hands-on one. As a copper, if you go to a fatal accident, you might get to see the body, but your job is to control the scene and direct traffic and do the investigation if someone dies. But the people that are really at the coalface are the fireys and the ambos, getting the person out and treating them. But on the air ambulance, suddenly as a copper in the air ambulance, you were there with you're not doing the traffic, you're not investigating, you're there with the paramedic, getting your hands dirty, and then once they're in the helicopter. So I never joined the police force to do that.
Yeah.
But it just happened to be part of the job that I had to do if I wanted to fly around in helicopters.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and like fatal accidents, I don't know. I have no idea how many I would have gone to, or how many traumatic jobs I would have gone to, I probably couldn't even guess.
And I think that's a good, and I'm going to say this, Cam, I think that's a good thing.
Oh,
you're
yeah.
you're not keeping count of, and you actually don't know that actual number over 35 years of
The good
policing.
thing is I couldn't work it out either.
Yeah.
I might be able to, through a logbook, work out how many trauma jobs I went to in the helicopter, but I'm not going to bother. But I'd never be able to work out how many I did in the 8 years prior to that.
Yeah, and in the time of general,
No idea.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a few that you mentioned in the book that we haven't even spoken about. That, yeah, there's ones that, and that's it. It's probably a good thing that you didn't keep it. And I think, too, you don't need to, you already know what your triggers are and what, you don't need to know that.
Look, yeah, I think during that treatment cycle and during getting over it, PTSD, we never get over it, but learning to live with and manage the symptoms, I think it'd be silly for me to even try and work it out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that might open a door that I really don't want to open.
Yeah.
You don't know if years down the track one might open, and that's just the way it is. I mean, that has happened, and I mentioned the last chapter of the book about driving past a certain spot, and I remember I'd totally forgotten about this accident. I remember it like it was yesterday, all of a sudden. So that could happen any time. So I don't need to go and chase that.
No, that's right. That's you. Yeah, you, and like you said to me at dinner, where there's certain things that you've forgotten that are probably a good thing too.
Memory loss is one of those symptoms of PTSD, and I think it's good, providing it stays in that role. But unfortunately, there's some good stuff I'd like to remember that I don't remember, because it takes your your loss of memory, and PTSD doesn't decipher between trauma and the good stuff. And as I said over dinner, I can't remember the birth of my 2 kids.
Yeah.
I can remember bits and pieces of one of them, I don't know which. But I don't remember. And my wife, Sue, talks about the kids growing up, what they used to do as infants, and I don't remember any of that. None of it.
Yeah, right.
And if it wasn't her remembering it, we wouldn't have a laugh about it, because I got no idea, about the way the kids learned how to walk.
Yeah.
Sue was saying the other day, one did a bummer shuffle. I can't remember that.
Amazing, isn't it? How the brain can just switch certain things off and turn certain things, like switch a tap off, and then turn another tap on.
And if you look at the timing, my kids were born 2007, 2009, the height of all those deployments.
Yeah. So
if there's any time that I'd have blackouts of memory, that would be it.
Yeah.
So it's understandable.
Oh yeah, I understand. I was going to say, yeah, absolutely.
But unfortunately, your memory loss, you wish it had just concentrated on the bad stuff. But unfortunately, it covers everything.
So you mentioned in your book, you wrote your book, and we've spoken about it throughout the podcast, 10 foot tall and not quite bulletproof in 2020.
Yep. Was
that a process for you to sort of give your kids a sense of what Dad had done for, in his service to help them understand your journey of your PTSD journey to that point, or was it more just a cathartic thing for you to get the part of the process?
It was all of it. Depends on different times. Originally, I started to write notes about traumatic jobs that I remember bits about. When I got diagnosed, the first thing I did is I bought books on written by people that experienced PTSD. A lot of US military books are out there, but not very many on coppers, and not very many Australian ones. And there was 2 I read. One was Alan Sparks' The Cost of Bravery, and the other one was John Cantwell's Exit Wounds. And when I was reading John Cantwell's Exit Wounds, he said things about when he had this breakdown. I thought, wow, that's just like I did. And as I'm reading it, I'll remember bits and pieces of... I could be reading the book and I'm thinking about something traumatic that I did. I have to read the same page 3 or 4 times. But I'd write it down because I couldn't remember all of it. And after about 18 months of doing that, I had pages and pages of notes that I thought, I've got to write this and work out, just because I wanted to know.
Yeah.
So I pieced them all together and I took it to a friend who's a writer, and she says, "What?" Showed me how to write it into stories. Then it got to a stage where I thought I've got to continue this, because now that was a sort of cathartic process. And then I thought, well, if I continue this and keep writing it this way, this is something I can give my kids. Because my kids growing up in their really younger years, when they were 5 and 8, I was at my worst. I'd had that massive breakdown. I was seeing doctors all the time, had a terrible anger. I was probably drinking too much. I wasn't eating, I wasn't sleeping. I would have been horrible to live with. I remember one day yelling at my daughter, who was only young and who had run into the bedroom and cowering in the corner. And I felt like such an asshole. And I thought, she's going to remember that for the rest of her life. If I keep writing, maybe this might explain a bit. Not excuse me, but it might explain a bit. Yeah. So then it became about them. And then it got to the point where I had like 2/3 of a book, and I took it back to my author friend, and she said, "You should try and get this published." So then I finished it, and she helped me write a couple of letters to publishers, and I sent it and it got published. But the decision to go out published wasn't to have it for my kids, it was to have other people to read. So I thought, if someone else has PTSD as a copper, they can go to this book, not just the books that I found. Because I think most coppers, when they get diagnosed with PTSD, want to know what it's about, which I think most people do. And it's nice. I thought it'd be good if there's another book out there.
And I think too, at that time, there wasn't a lot of police books out there.
No, I think there was. I think Alan Sparks had written. That was the first one written by someone who'd suffered PTSD.
Yeah.
There was another New South Wales copper wrote one called Life Sentence. It came out not long before I published mine, and that was a good one too. But it wasn't out at the time that I was searching for books.
And there's been an influx since.
There's been heaps since, which is good. I mean, the more that's out there,
the better it is.
The better it is, because I truly think that one of the ways through to battle that PTSD and learn to live with the symptoms and get a reasonably normal life is about knowledge and knowing what the symptoms are, how they affect you, how to avoid them, how to function normally while still avoiding these triggers.
Yep.
And then when the triggers do hit, how to get past it. Because as you know, there's no cure.
No.
There's no magic tablet. So you've got to learn to live and manage the symptoms. And that takes, they say 2 years, but I'd say 5.
Yeah.
It's a long process.
Oh.
And even longer for some people. And some people never get past that really bad stage, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think you're right. Like, mate, it took me 3 years to find someone that connected with me properly, and it's something that Banksy said in his. It was finding. He had to go through a few girlfriends to find the right one, and I used the old term in the movie from Forrest Gump. Life is like a box of chocolates.
It is.
You never know which one you might get, and
it's like shopping for psychologists. You got to find. You don't think that you're just going to go to the hospital, find a psychologist, and they're going to cure you of PTSD. It doesn't happen that way.
No.
You got to find the right one that suits you.
That's right, and you might have to go through a few.
And I did.
Yeah.
Psychiatrists and psychologists. I was lucky that the commissioner at the time, Andrew Colvin, was the commissioner of the AFP. He'd found out about what happened to me because I had a big legal case trying to get it covered by work cover, because I had 2 police forces arguing with each other saying it's not their fault, and you're left in the middle with nothing. So he actually got together with a welfare girl who told him about my case, and he had funded my treatment at Ward 17, which is the military psych ward at the Austin Hospital, and they had this great PTSD program. So he had paid for it and got me in there pending an insurance company accepting my claim. And that was another 18 months. So if it wasn't for him paying for that for me to go there, I might not be as well as I am now. In fact, I might not have even gone there at all.
Yeah.
So
It's
if I ever get the chance to thank Andrew Colvin, I'll make sure I let him know. I hope he's listening. But yeah, I reckon I was damn lucky to get that.
I think it's something that you touch on and you're breaking down the stigma of it's not weak to speak, and it's a sign of strength, and that's something my psychologist said that and I know it, and I've told you, Cam, you've read my manuscript as well, that, and I say it on every podcast I get the chance to, is it's not weak to speak. And with you being able to talk about your journey and the process, and I think the more that we all get around and talk about it, the more comfortable people will feel coming forward into the future. And I think that's the way forward. It's feeling, it's having conversations like this that, you know, you can make sense of, and having a platform to help each other, and that's essentially what it is. It's helping each other to try and sort of, well, I know for me that it's to help people not go through the pain and suffering that if I can ease the burden on them, that's what it's about. That's why, you know, that's why I do the podcast. Yeah. It's same for you. You get out, you talk, and it leads you into, you know, you retire. So retired in the same year your book came out in 2020.
Yeah, that was when I stopped work. I didn't actually. Yeah, actually, it was 2020. The end of 2020, I think.
The end of 2020, yeah,
officially retired.
Officially retired, and so after 35 years, and then now you're doing a lot with charities, and you're doing a lot with PTSD and people who suffer PTSD and mental health. Is that as rewarding now for the same as your police career in helping others, or is it a different purpose now?
I think it's a different purpose. I mean, yeah, it's rewarding, very rewarding. I wish that there was that many people talking about it back then when it happened to me. It's only 8 years ago, and a lot's happened in 8 years.
Yeah.
And now you find a lot of people talking about it, which is great. But not only that, some of the departments, police departments, fire departments, the bosses are listening, and they've changed the way they treat people because people are speaking out. It's not only that it's helping others that are suffering, it's also changing policy with police procedures and the way they help people after incidents.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was through, in my initial stages, there's no way you'd say to your sergeant that you're having trouble sleeping or you keep having bad memories about an accident you went to, otherwise, mate, you're not working. And I remember a time when one of my mates on the helicopter said to the boss one day that he's having trouble working the ambulance. You know, he's finding it really difficult because of the fatalities and the trauma, and he got grounded. So he got punished for speaking up about the fact that he had problems.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't happen now. And the only reason that doesn't happen now is people at Banksy are speaking out.
Yeah.
And saying, hey, if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. You need to do something about it. Still a long way to go.
Oh,
the other thing is, when you speak out, you're not only helping someone that's got PTSD or changing policy with police forces and employers, but those people around them, the people around those people are suffering too. And a lot of us forget about the wives and the girlfriends and the kids. And I reckon they cop the biggest bum deal because they see the really bad anger. You try and tell someone that PTSD causes you to be really angry. You have no patience and you can go from zero to total anger and destruction in a split second. And no one understands that. They don't get that. But your family certainly do because they see it. The depression. No one sees you when you're depressed because you're in your bedroom. Your family sees that. The self-worth. No one knows about the self-worth issue. Your family sees that.
Yeah.
So your family cop all of it and know everything that's going on. And we seem to forget about them. They need their help groups and their friends to talk to and listen to stuff like this as well. So I think speaking out is way bigger than the individual, and we should all be doing it.
Absolutely. And you're right, it's a key point you touch on. Your service doesn't just affect you. It's your family has a greatest.
I think they get the worst deal out of it all. You know, they get to experience the symptoms, but they didn't experience the job.
Yeah.
You know, because like it or not, some of the worst traumatic jobs that cause this PTSD, I thoroughly enjoyed doing.
Yeah.
And I would do again 1,000,000 times over. If you gave me a chance to say, hey, I'll tell you what, and I've asked coppers this before they got PTSD, let's set the clock back. You can change everything and have it a sedate police career or fire career and sit at a desk and you'll end your career healthy without PTSD. Or we can go and do it all again. You'll have PTSD and be what you are now. And every one of them said, oh yeah, I'll do it the same.
I think that is such a great way to look at it. I mean, you see people, and you're right, that can go through doing nothing in their whole career, and going, oh yeah, no, it's great. Yeah, I had a great career, and it's like, oh okay, what was your highlight? Oh, I didn't do much. Yeah, and you know, you've got stories, like you've got some amazing stories, and the experiences that you've experienced, and I mean, you know, and that was actually going to be one of my questions. If you could go back to when you were 18, to when you first joined,
or joined the army, I think. No.
and knowing what you know now, and you obviously said, you know, you wouldn't change anything, but the experience that you gained as the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, wet behind the ears 18-year-old, would you give him any advice?
Geez, that's a difficult question, because I'd always said to myself, if I had known about the symptoms of PTSD, I would have done something about it earlier. Would it have stopped the breakdown in 2015? Not so sure.
Yeah.
So maybe that sort of advice. I wish I had known what the symptoms were, made it stop, and save myself a lot of trouble. But that doesn't mean things were going to end up differently.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'd do it. That 18-year-old, I still wear that as a badge of honour being so young.
Yeah.
And actually surviving it, I suppose. But yeah, I wouldn't change. I don't think I'd change a thing. I'd do it exactly the same. I mean, even the bad bits were good. Now that I look at them.
And I mean, for you, like you mentioned your family, and like now, what are your plans going into the future with your family?
That's a battle. It's a battle to make sure that those symptoms, when they come to the forefront and you experience the depression or the anger and it's controlling it for their sake, that's difficult. So my focus is to make sure that these symptoms don't affect them. That when I spend time with my kids and my wife, it's quality time. And I pick and choose what I do. I know that I don't like social functions. I don't like being outwardly social with a bunch of people. So the other day my wife got an invite to a wedding. I didn't go. Now I don't stop my wife from going. I think she needs to go. But I pick the things that I need to go to, and I make sure I do as much as I can with the family, as much as I can.
Yeah.
If I know there's warning signs there that I shouldn't do it, I don't. So I've got to make sure I keep doing that. I certainly don't want to go back to that scary dad that yells. My kids know now that certain triggers, like if the automatic machines where you scan all your stuff at Coles, I can't stand them because they annoy me, because this is my level of patience. I want to scan something, I want it to work first time. And then I don't want to be asked 50 questions before I pay. I just want to scan it and pay. And it asks you, do you want to donate? Do you have this card? Do you want this card? Do you want to pay cash? So my son, Lewis, says, Dad, you know what you like? I'll scan it. So I stand there while he scans everything and then I pay. That's how much he knows about the situation. So they're smart. But yeah, I think going forward it's about spending quality time and not letting that ugly PTSD monster come out.
And I think that's great advice and great awareness by you to know, and your kids to know what triggers you, and to go, well, we don't want to see Dad back where he was, and we understand, and we'll work with him. And it's a team, it's a team. Like you're working through this horrible monster together. And I think like your kids can see, and I think the book it's great for them to see, hey, Dad, he went and did some, pretty terrible, like he, saw some terrible things, and it humanises you in a sense, in a way that they can read it, understand it, and go, we might react exactly the same way as, at the end of the day, Dad's just human, and he's trying to process all the trauma that he's been through. He's trying to process it in the best way he can, and and that's great that they're aware of it. You're aware of it, and what advice? And we're getting to the end now, and what advice would you give to any young person who is thinking about a career in the police force?
Oh, look, I think probably the biggest thing I needed was to know about the symptoms of PTSD. So I think education. I think you need to know what your limits are, and like I said before, there's normal reactions to trauma, whether they be hate, grief, anger, sadness, and don't deny it. But if you go to a major accident where someone's died, you've seen someone die, then it's all right to have a tear at the end of the day, rather than a beer. If you feel upset, feel upset. If you get angry, get angry. If you want to blame someone. But don't push it aside and say, like I used to say, I've got to do that because I've got to go to work the next day.
Give yourself time to process it.
Give yourself the time and freedom to process and experience the normal reactions to trauma.
You don't switch it off. Don't be a robot. Yeah.
You're not a robot, and you've got to experience those things. And they can't. Those reactions like sadness and guilt and all that stuff, they don't disappear.
No.
I mean, if you think about something, say, something traumatic as your childhood that brought you to tears, and you think about it again, you feel the emotion again.
Yeah.
So it doesn't go away.
No, not at all.
So these coppers go on these accidents or these really traumatic things, and time again, they're brushing the emotion aside and denying it. And eventually what will happen is something happen and they'll experience something similar and they won't be able to turn it off. And all that emotion that's been bottling up, it's got to come back. It's got to come out somewhere.
Absolutely.
It doesn't disappear in the ether. We think it does, but it doesn't.
No, that's right. And yeah, it's great advice. And I think, for any young person that listens to this and is thinking of joining the police, just go in with your eyes wide open and reach out to...
Still one of the noble, as they say, it's a noble calling to be a police officer, and I think it's a really great job. And, I think back at the PTSD and how difficult it was over those years, but... and I write in my book and also tell a lot of friends about this, that you seem to focus on these really negative parts of these jobs and forget about the people that you helped along the way. And, there are people out there that live a better life because of my intervention or my partner or the people we work with, their intervention.
Yeah.
There are people that are no longer drug addicts, no longer in relationships where it's abusive, or... they're no longer criminals and they've moved on, or they've got a better job, or they just have a better life, or whatever, because of your intervention.
Yeah, you
play. We don't focus on that.
No.
And there's far more of those than what there is of the traumatic experiences. So instead of thinking about the bad stuff, just think about the amount of people you help and have a better life because of it. And sometimes I say that, I'm really proud of that part.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about it, and it took the book to make me remember that, and that's why I put it in the end. And I look at, I did a really great job, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I helped a lot of people. Yeah, some people died, some people didn't, but I helped a lot of people. And now to me, the PTSD and that is more like the price that I pay for doing that job that I loved.
Yeah.
So it's no longer, and I'm happy to pay that price.
It's
now.
Yeah.
At the time, terrible. But now I see it as lights at the end of the tunnel, the light at the end of the tunnel, the worst thing that can ever happen to you. I understand now that that's the price I'm willing to pay. Would I pay it all over again? Yeah, I should do. Yeah.
Yeah, it's made you who you are. And
it's made me who I am.
Yeah, and I think, as you say, it's a great point to end the podcast on, is the lives that you, along the way, you've lost a few, but you've also saved a few. And I think that's a really great, if we sum up 35 years of policing career, that is a great way to sum it up, that you, as the old saying, you win some, you lose some. I think the wins have outweighed
far outweigh
the losses.
But we never seem to focus on that, do we?
No, we don't. And so, with the book, how do people get it? How do people get copies of the book? And how do people get in contact with you if they want to get you for a speaking engagement? Or
I'm on Instagram. You'll find it. If you type in 10 feet tall and not quite bulletproof, you'll probably find me.
Yep.
But you can get the book at Amazon. Amazon still reasonably cheap. Booktopia's still got it. I think it's out of the shops now. But you usually get it online.
Yep.
Yeah. And an ebook as well if you're into that sort of stuff.
And obviously speaking gigs and all that sort of
thing. Yeah,
I've
done them. I don't accept everyone offer. I pick and choose.
Yep.
Like I said, I might have said over dinner, they're quite difficult to do.
Yeah.
Because they take a lot out of you, but I don't mind it. I don't mind doing them. But the book, you can get at most online stores and me through Instagram. I don't have Facebook or anything like that. I try to ignore that sort of stuff. So you'll find me at Cam_Hardiman at Instagram, or just type in 10 feet tall, not quite bulletproof.
Yep.
Because I tag that sometimes.
Well, Cam, I want to finish with a quote that I believe sums your story up. And your story is one of inspiration, courage, bravery, which is absolutely, in every sense of the word, it's bravery and never giving up. And the quote is, "Bravery is not the absence of fear, but action in the face of fear." I believe this sums your career up and your 35 years in both the Victorian Police and also the Australian Federal Police. You've served your country with honour, you've served your state and your family with pride, and you are an inspiration. And I want to thank you for coming on True Blue Conversations and sharing your story. Thank you for the work that you do for your brothers and sisters in the police force and first responders and people who are struggling with mental health and PTSD. And it's been an absolute honour to have you on.
That's great words. Love that.
No, mate.
Who said that quote? I've read it before.
I've got that. It's a policing quote. Okay. So I've used that. It's an absolute. It's been an honour and a privilege to have you on, mate. And
thank you. It's really good to chat.
It. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much, Cam.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review for the podcast on whatever platform you get your podcasts. And check out our new website, truebluehistory.com, for more great content.